All right, start with the Heart Sutra. For that, someone said sound. Can you hear me, Tom? Hopefully you can. I prostrated the Arya triple gem, thus we here at one time. The Bhagavan was dwelling Master Bhajan land in his country, together with a great community of monks and a great community of Bodhisattvas. Called profound perception. Also at that time, Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokiteshvara looked upon the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those having also as empty of inherent. Then through the path of interest in wisdom and Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokiteshvara. Asha, then the son of the lineage trainer, wishes to practice the activity of profound perfection of wisdom. He said that in the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage, wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom. Shungapan like this, correctly and repeatedly recalling as power gates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, composition, practice, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, means there is no form. Discrimination of composition of consciousness. No eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no brain, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, no form. There is no eye element and soul not to including no mind element to no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extension of ignorance, and so not to including no aging and death, no extension of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation in the path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, Bodhisattvas rely on well perfection, without obscuration, without fear, having completely passed beyond error to reach the endpoint of Nibbana. All the Buddhas who dwell in 3 times also manifestly completely awakened to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment, the reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequal, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering should be known in the truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is the truth. Tayata Om Gate Gate Pada Gate Pada Sangati Bodhisattva. Shariputra, Bodhisattva Mahasattva should train in profound perfection of wisdom. Then the Bhagavan wrote through that concentration, commanded Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara. Well said, son of me, which is like that, it is like that. One should practice profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated, even if it advertises from the truth. The Bhagavan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Shariputra, Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, and those surrounding him in their entirety, along the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, are overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagavan. To the government of the 3 chakras in space, life, human coordinations, local practitioners, practice. Tayata Om Gate Gate Bodhisattva. The teachings of the power of truth may even be inspired, may shield and follow the soul. May all negative forces of Dharma be completely consumed. May the host of 80,000 obstacles be passed by and separated from problems and harmful conditions to Dharma. May all enjoyments be in the cause of the Dharma. May there be a spaciousness of perfect happiness here in life. Sanji Chodan Soki Chonama Chanchu Badi Dani Yosu Dagi Chishi Betsona Dola Benchi Sanji Luka Sanji Chodan Soki Chonama Chanchu Badi Dani Yosu Dagi Chishi Betsona Dola Benchi Sanji Luka Sanji Chodan Soki Chonama Chanchu Badi Dani Yosu Dagi Chishi Betsona Dola Benchi Sanji Luka Coffee offering? Thanks, it's like combining gear.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. And from the side to the and chicken mama san give you chili, Geshe to some of the toy is one. I mean, come on, boy, you just kid yours, right?
So before we start today, Geshe, I wanted to say a few words. So it is March 10th today, which is a significant event in the history of Tibetan peoples. Over 6 million Tibetans in Tibet. For those of us who see ourselves as followers of the Buddha Dharma, then this is this particular date. This day is a date in which one could feel sorrow in the heart.
chance garden chance kichi shu they want to garden change community chabayna and maybe some shit Karina now, Pujan, some of them, and it's garden chance, we cover it. Things are garden chance, we should be, and garden Karjan, but the Hakoina, and garden chance, we will service.
So we speak a lot in the Buddha Dhamma about remembering the kindness. Remember the kindness. So maybe we can say in those sense being grateful, right? So you remember the kindness and you feel grateful. So if you know how to consider the kindness of others, you can certainly put it into your practice, in the practice of the Buddha Dhamma, without being able to think long term. It's difficult to feel this right sense or adequate sense of gratitude for others' kindness. So this is something that runs deep in this tradition.
These are the and the so and the number some chili and some bomb some Tanzania long Jetta Cassie Namoria and number some chill and you show on the I wrote some master one time 생금 내야 한집 강을 얘기는 소리야 통이시 최디 한집 너무 들리네요 다 투야기 좀디 아 딱지 드링 두전양 통째 디 이모들이야 제와야 되지 차고로서 하스는 전도 주비기 다른 주인 것들이야 지금도 정말 중요한 전도 주비 다른 주인 것들이야 근데 Yama Pontang di Dusutta, and Chik Nam Samdang, or Dinti Chiguroli, and Yaru Chiguri, the Chigu Kanki, and the and Yakama, such a community, and Chik Nime Choki, and Chik Chomp Emmanuel, to change the routine, and a Dinti La Soba, and Lamative Tanso, Chignipi Yamigi, and Dojonga, Nachuta, Nyanga, Manda Tidigon, and Yaramabani, trails, three garden daily, and Yaramabani, Mamma, and Chikar Belly of my small debate, and Shuju Kardi, and Chilon Denny Gomba to soup, and Dina Lomia Chasing, Denny Lomia Kimbi, that language was over. So, and no show what to do. Let to Helen and Chisel to do that, and one so the language is and the choir, but the two you want deep. And she yarum to TV and from to the Chega deep Yasa to Mena and Thunder Gidich Yoya deep. He so in Yomas love to what I read it was.
So now in this center, we have the conditions that make it possible for us to study, reflect, and meditate on the teachings of the Buddha. So we can study, reflect, and meditate. We can study the great philosophical systems that become now widespread in communities or societies outside of Tibet, in the West, and so forth. So we have the ability to do that. And when we think of not only be able to study, reflect upon the Buddha Dhamma in general, but also to use the Buddha Dhamma in our life, in this society, to deal with some mental problems and difficulties that we do experience sometimes on a daily basis, we can feel grateful, first of all, for the teachings of the Buddha, but also in thinking of how our situation is strongly related to events that took part in recent Tibetan history. Well, today is March 10th, which is the in which Tibetans commemorate the uprising day. So in 1959, after the Tibetan uprising that preceded, the deep oppression of the Chinese forces in Tibet, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, together with lamas and lamas from other major traditions in Tibet, His Holiness the Karmapa and Psychotransin, and people from the Nyingma tradition, Pema Nobu and Digo Khyentse Rinpoche and so forth. Many made their way into exile, fleeing the Chinese oppression in Tibet, and they took place in India, establishing monasteries in India, establishing again, just like before, places of study, institutions for study, in which, just like before, they continued their study, reflection, and meditation. And following that, there started a movement of some of those lamas, spiritual teachers, geshes, and so forth to the West, also to places like Australia. So people like Kyabje Lama Sopa Rinpoche and Lama Yeshe that also, you could say, came to the West, established center as part of that historical movement that fled Tibet due to the occupation. So following His Holiness the Dalai Lama, there were more than 150,000 Tibetan refugees that fled Tibet. So you could say that had that not happened, we would probably not have had the ability to study, reflect, and meditate on the teachings of the Buddha, the opportunity that we have now. So this is one thing that we can think of, particularly this day, the Tibetan Uprising Day, March 10th.
Last number and member that Kanjimama don't see the Chegadi, Jagalaya, and Senjula Yochi, that Jagalaya, and then the Cheguras, the Kalayachi, and in Kibuchida, and in Led Hawachi, Zawin, Gamban on the Sultan, Yani and Somanza, Zawin, Julia Maris. Pena that you can do with Gate, and it's jigs my chibi, that Chugi Shingalo. And it's that you and Pum Chigi, Nakalo, and Yamruki, and Yarashungi, and Baxas in the Shashas, and Baxas in the and Lombardi, Chitang the Yarana, and Sachi Shuch, really such a Toshuch, Kaisana, and Yaradi, Inchi, on you all the year because the Baya, Inchi, so much you say. And such a delicious. That Delaya Gendo Batonda Kashichi, that Lochi Nisum, indigenous David and Soviet King, and Sadu Chambode, and Gendo Mambu Shuch, Pigilia, and they don't show you sober. And the bed massive Kunga Chevers. Yina Kunga indigenous Chabala Modiva, and so Tova, the Tofakaraya, Katam, Zawin, Royal Mice. Kanga Ruruch Dechi, Lava Chichi, Rock, any Pena Chojuk, Tepchik di, any Yaritanchi, Rock, or do Sin Kalijami, and the Tamadalea, Yawarum Chigi, and Yarashon, and Yarashung Sigoya, Mang Chishidi, and Yabojolaya, and Penadachi Densakade, Pena and Namdu, but the champion and want to be Lojong Tini, Gomakanga, and Jabazolaya, and that the mind that Mambios, Jarachan shoulder, but the deal I have to any that long itching choyos. That the is that dear. This is some of the Deliat. Chew Toy, Nelson goes from Chiagi. You saw the shadow was it another stronger on some tangles. What did you shadow?
Under the leadership of His Holiness Dalai Lama, more than 150,000 refugees made their way to India. It's not that the initial years were happy and easy years. It's not that they had it very easy. Actually, the conditions were quite difficult. So for example, amongst the people that fled Tibet, there was a big Sangha community belonging to all the spiritual traditions in Tibet. So you can say the 4 major traditions together with the Jonang tradition. So let's say altogether 5 spiritual traditions, major traditions, made their way to India. And the monastic community mainly at the beginning took place at a refugee center that was called Baksa. That was quite notorious for being a difficult place to live. It was hot, it was humid, it was crowded and so forth, and of course the environment was vastly different to the environment that they have enjoyed previously in Tibet. Baksa used to be a penal colony that was established by colonial British. So then Tibetans were sent to that penal colony because it was basically an empty space. So the Sangha community, the monastics, took residence in that place. And it's not that they started to fend for themselves, each one for themselves, going out to find food. It's more that they stuck together. They continued the study and reflection together in those difficult conditions. And also at that time, Buddhist texts were quite scarce, right? So they had to leave Tibet urgently. They couldn't pack all the necessities that Sangha needed to have, including all the texts. So finding a text such as, for example, Shantideva's Guide to Bodhisattva Way of Life was quite difficult. So you would share the text. So you would pass on pages, a few pages to one individual, a couple of individuals. They had to study that and memorize it and then pass it on to another person. So the conditions for study, reflection, and meditation were also not easy, but still they continued to do that. And under the leadership of His Honesty Dalai Lama, who was holding some meetings with Indian officials, at the end, some places for Tibetan settlers were allocated in different states in India, in South India, West India, and so forth. All across India, Tibetan settlements were established, including the big monasteries from the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, from the Gelug tradition, but not only that, also monasteries and institutions belonging to other traditions, such as, for example, Namdroling, that belongs to the Nyingma traditions, and other traditions as well. So then those institutions for study and practice were established all across India, where mainly those monastics continue with the activities of study, reflection, and meditation. So this is also something that we remember in this day.
Shina imza mi shina ge thale tan de gombo yosa chen khashin thong yide gombo yosa ma dro ni mi manga sanzam jo so le ya o tinti chile ya ani khur gyam ani thawatu khur nam de che ani gonda khur nam ni ningu shina chega ta jaga jung pi sa je chim tre tina ge shina ga che che ani shinka su o du chen ta 아니 그 신동 제제 요리 신디 아니 지금 도간다 아니 지 소소 대사가 캄바스 두스는 나올로 체샤스라 다 신동 제가 가더니 딱강 가지요니 아니 그 참물로 아니 라베도 고로스 아니 미시요 마크기요 마 라베도 신동 거스를 지내 신가스 다 드디 야가도절이야 지난 차친보리 아니 랑친 슈요 신나기요 큐드 큐진데고 아니 지금 신가담다 공다 신가 중거도 다 자도 리코스 신가 중거도 카도리야지 란친 자마무 세도스라 어다데지 강나 파프메바 jaksin 이네 강나 카주스 여바이니 강나 동니치스라 랑기 지금 메세 나와요 벤주 지금에 미데어 마이고 고바치 비기네 차수부 지원 체도 에 참으로 양르부터 고팅이 고치 아니 슈칭 슈지 안 델이야 동상념이 로버칭 조칭 안 단디차야 딱 잠들이야 아니 몸쳐야 돼 소미기 때니디 두신 추샤스라
So, for example, Sera Monastery was established in South India sometimes during the 1960s, and it was established at Karnataka state. So at that time, the area that was allocated for Tibetan settlers was a jungle, a forest. They lived for a long while in tents, so sleeping in tent accommodation during the night, and during the day they had to clear the forest, to make room for Tibetan settlers. Some of the land that they cleared was turned into fields, growing food for people, and everything was done by hand, right? So there were no machineries, no chainsaws or what have you to cut trees. Everything was done by hand, including all the field work. And the trees that were cut were used later on to build houses for the refugees that took residence in South India. It was also used for building the monastery halls and so forth. So the first couple of decades were quite involved with quite a lot of hard work, and it's not that people left to find their own livelihood. They still stuck together and make sure that they rebuild their communities in order to make sure that the study, reflection, and meditation could continue to the future. So wherever help was needed, people went out and helped in order to make sure that those communities still survive and thrive. And our ability today to enjoy the Buddha Dharma is attributed also to that.
And Lama tribute to so and gold tanging season. Then Benami and the church ministers of just the young Singata, Niman Tangarwa, and Dean gold tanging and Lama tribute to the Garanshim was here, Dean gold tanging, or two subversity and Gombat success.
So I left out something. So also, that place in South India, Karnataka state, not only was hot, but it was also and there were also quite a lot of wild elephants, which were quite territorial. So in the first few years, not only they had to protect the fields and so forth from elephants, every once in a while, the elephants got really crazy, went on a rampage and used to kill monks. Quite a lot of monks lost their life being trampled or killed by elephants. Anyway, everyone had to go out to work in the fields. Regardless of what your status was, if you were a lama, a reincarnated lama, Geshe, everyone had to go out and work in the field. So at some point they created their own system in that if you were recognized as a tuku or as a teacher, then you also had to go out to the field, but you were given the work of a supervisor, right? So you had a team of maybe 25 people or 50 people that worked in the field. So the supervisor was a tuku, a lama. So in that sense, they had to do, the physical work was slightly easier, but they still had to do it.
Yeah, the Ilaya Peter and Kalaya Made, and it's Satwaya Yabuya, Kaya Yabuya Made, and it's same you shooting. Do drawn Tanazu, then the Chido we get Cabdel and the jury of matter, get Cabdel Kawina, Chatsamo, Gajin Chichu, Singata was no always. Rukatulaya, Kayomata, and the Tassam Singata was no and Chatsamo baby, and Zemozi Lune, and Singata. The Thunder machine gives some way of Savia, come to the Paju, Tangoras, come to the Paju, Tawatso, tension, and a Singapore somewhere of Chati, and the tower deep chart of the shingle searching, the tiny tension, and it's someone who cheers. Come to the Mediana, and one the time tossing it deep, Kawa Tonayata, driver says, and she not check what you Chirosera, and a Shingata would Pemasiva, and Leka Hobo, Dindi chara, so that can dindi chin, the gomba 2 years, no near come 2 years.
And also during that time, food and drinking water and clothing and so forth were of really poor quality. They weren't, it was still quite hard going, and yet people were quite happy. Geshe arrived at Sera Monastery in 1987, and they still had field duties where monks had to take rotations to do field shifts. And Geshe says that as you live in this monastic community, when you have chores like that to do, then you go out with your friend and it's quite enjoyable. So as you work along, then you sing songs and you play around. So it was still done with a happy and joyous state of mind. And as we said, there wasn't any machinery for field work. So if you had to plow the field, for example, everything was done by hand. And there were times in which you couldn't get a cow or a buffalo to use a manual plow. So you would harness 2 monks into the 2 pieces of stick and the knife that went into the ground, and use them as kind of manual labor. And Geshe said that since you do it together in teams of monks and friends, and you sing and you're happy, then monks became quite renowned for their ability to cope with the conditions, but also to keep on working. So in terms of clearing trees and working in the fields or building and so forth, they became quite renowned in the ability to work hard and succeed in whatever they had to do.
Never be Pelio, number Sandy will cheer you, and don't make Kalia, and Lomi Chimney, Lomi Campbelos. That show your that ding of Chunga, Nashing on Nabu, he is only a touch, and that pair with Sanzami, Chen Kanji, and Yamil Shongi, Gomba Truton Hatch, Gomba Tonta Trut Hatch, Torios. And it's Chadrin Bunching Havach sort of bangles. Teaching a kanjing of Chunga, the true chureta, Kalia, that's Piggy, Chava Pashan, and Chachikuna Pashan, and Kan Maniking in the pension. Chome Kanji, Suzuki, Punjalia, Pumachan, but Tindichi series, that decabulia. Government government and Benjamin and give them a kaji, do Tindiji Yonia, Tiola shooting, Benjamin Lord Peshe, and it should be between Zongan shooters. Zongani, Benjamin Zongan Tani, and Gami Shonaya, and Yensenki, you do this, you get to Nishi preacher, the kanji, and Tamata Linchanda, and Techumasins in the yard, and it's Pelaya, that chose in which she is, that Benjamin cutting yatches, and ditching that, and it Benjamin put the shoe Tamadelaya, that's married down, pretty sure that visual, but and seems to chat and it gammy the summer monthly, Thomas, and put Troyan is the ditch wheels.
And as Chinese took over Tibet, the situation got worse and worse in Tibet. During the late 1950s, leading to the Tibetan Uprising and so many Tibetans leaving Tibet, then the 1960s and 70s, during the time of the Cultural Revolution, were a great time of upheaval. So more than 6,000 monasteries were razed down to the ground. More than 100,000 monastics were killed. Almost 1 million people lost their life as a direct result of the Chinese occupations, and the practice of religion was completely prohibited. So not only it was not allowed to wear one robe, so you couldn't see anyone wearing the robes. Even reciting prayers was prohibited, even making offerings, even insofar as just offering a battle lamp, all of that was prohibited. So Tibetans in Tibet, after His Holiness the Dalai Lama fled to India, have experienced terrible times. And still there were great lamas that remain in Tibet under Chinese occupations, and they've suffered greatly. So for example, the Panchen Lama that remained in Tibet was at some point sent to prison, and he spent about 17 or 18 years in prison. After his release, he was appointed at some point to oversee the process of restoration of some of the institutes in Tibet. And at some point, he published a 70,000 letters document in which he detailed the wrongdoings of the Chinese government, Chinese people in Tibet. Sorry, the Chinese government in Tibet. And then as he was gaining popularity and gaining a lot of power amongst Tibetan people, Communist China got a bit scared of his power and then assassinated him.
아니 까지 도는 세매버지 나주 세매버지 냥고 총이나 아니 디 뇽세네 아니 산지 템비 타워야 딘지지 코시여스로 딘지지 콜레지야스 딘자다 난소 비게 딘지 아니 튕긴 무슨 줘봐 아니 라와 뇽스도 뇽지 쇼사기 아니 넘버 딘지지를 내치니 이 아니 산지 템버들이야 아니 코치 마나바이나 아니 legendary Zani Domudas is a Tanzania Yapin, Penamania, G. And it touches Sunju to Kadit Savania, Nitoncha to the Yami, Juju Biology, Jasayatan, the Bine and Singmaris. In a Diza, and on the Pervi, Chapsi, Pervi, Neddy, Chetan give to Chapsi Samainda, Lange Sheham, Chapsi Samainda. Zamani Delia, Tunto Yevige, and it's something which you Nedelia, to the Yogati, Munzinch, Chit Bodos, in Munzin Chevina, Della Pabi, and so the Karina, and it deleted and to the Sharochi said, for these.
So the Banzan experienced a lot of difficulties and a lot of hardships. And they did that for the sake of ensuring that the Buddha Dhamma will continue. So looking at our situation now, when we are able to enjoy the Buddha Dhamma, we have perfect conducive conditions. We have freedoms and liberties that make it possible for us to make the most out of our study and practice of the Buddha Dhamma. And if we do not take it up, and also with a sense of appreciation for all of those who have worked hard before and experienced a lot of hardship in doing so, that will not be an honest approach with respect to karma, actions, and the results. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And also, when we look at then Tibetan politics and their attempt to manage their situation, it's not just internal politics in which you have some people that are seeking their own victory, even if it comes at the expense of others in the Tibetan political system. Actually, we can consider the Tibetan system also as part of the global stage, in which if they were able to survive, or if they were able to prevail under these difficult circumstances, then also it will be beneficial to the world in terms of the message of the Buddha Dhamma. So anyway, Geshe wanted to begin with saying a few words about March 10th, which is today.
ni within the tola sangi tembali ya chachi yana na zangan de tarshos 개지 니르덴데야 상기 때문에 저치 틀면은 나도 체크쇼스 갱 문음께 있었으나 안 타마들이야 나 정간은 탈수했어 정간은 타고 잠었어 아니 비 아니 다 공부장 쳐도야 야사도라 레비카도 또 게임패스 단 젠종 하고라 젠종 패도 젠종의 패디기 아니 텔이야 나 지금 뭐시고 가시 또 젠종 야보기 아니 참 슝스 다 콘주기 다 gyobada 아니 제와초 다 겐차베야 보지 두시도 콘주게네 되어지 콘주기 짬디 야카 슝사기 과단져스 디겐라 그치 그냥 가두이나 델슈로치스 엔 퉁기 토야 가르조기 논주조기스 겐델라 아니 슈솔다 이나 겐기 공발이야 나 정강한 게 초지자 세드죠 방수 문은 되게 당나 수직 상황만 가지는데 아니 소소기 우치 대사 좀 다른 대바이나 레균들의 도마 공치 아니나 젠존나 마든 야가고죠 그게 자만 깔리게서 될이야 용이 소스 어딘지 나 아니 딘지 로도요 스라 공부 깨우던 것이야 딘지 로도도 스라
Geshe told a few times the story of his root teacher, Genrinpoche. He also spoke about it recently. So he spent 9 years in a labor camp, experiencing so much hardship in prison. And while he was in prison, he made this prayer. He says that if in the future I'd be able to be of benefit to the Buddha Dhamma, may I be liberated from prison. If I'm not going to be of benefit to the Buddha Dhamma, may I perish in prison. So he was released from prison after 9 years and made his way by foot to India. He arrived at Sikkim in northeast India, and as he was quite renowned for his study and practice, he was hosted by the Sikkimese royal family. He was offered the summer palace of the wife of the king of Sikkim at the time, and she said that he can make use of the summer palace. He can take it easy and relax and enjoy whatever good life could afford in that place. But he refused that, and he said that he made that pledge when he was in prison, in the presence of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions, to be of benefit to the Buddha Dhamma. So rather than enjoying the cushy life that was offered to him at Sikkim, he made his way to South India and took residence at Sera Monastery and continued with his position as a Dhamma teacher. So with that, let's go back to the text and pick up from the point that we left off yesterday. Right, so we've been looking at developing the antidote for the things which are incongruous with the development of common abiding, beginning with attachment. So when we develop an antidote to attachment, we begin with abandoning attachment to sentient beings. And first off, we started to look at a section explaining the disadvantages of attachment. So we've covered verse number 5 that came under the heading of not encountering what one wants. The second verse is teaching a lack of discrimination in regards to sensory objects. Let's read through the first 2 lines of verse number 6. Just a second. Not seeing them, I will not be happy. Also, my mind will not be set in equipoise.
제도 디기 같이 전자도 더디 디기 같이 다 데비 연데 주다터 대장한 데비 같이 대연라야 셈 슈 차소리 같이 셈 찬다 디다 간지 에 같이 뉴빅 소리다 아니 셈도 뉴 카드야 같이 아니 차시기 차유 이동와 아니 지 만통의 동안 만통의 동안 그 나야지 마다오기 아니 강요 마스 셈 동안 나와 아니 지 이냐뭐 좀 못하게 아니 딘디 강에 약간 들어서겠어
When it says not seeing them, I will not be happy. Not seeing object of the senses, not seeing desirable objects, the mind is made so unhappy as if it is crazy. And with a mind that is so distressed about not being able to see or to come across those objects of desire, my mind will not be set in equipoise.
이 메데비 셈양 이장 땡이즈 냠벌 좀 민글라 아니 이 비기 셈버야 세치 네마토마 미발라 아니 오니 고야 기다와지 토야디 용마리스.
The commentary says, someone asks, if one will not see anything attractive, how will it be? The answer, if one does not see anything beautiful, one will not have joy. Since one's mind will be unhappy, it will be distracted. It will not enter equipoise and concentration, and one will not attain happiness.
Then we touch Chagwe on the touch Dayan Tendinian, and Dayan Tobaginaya, and Tomni Chogmishibi, Dongardi, Chawashutana, and Choshi Maros, and Chogmishibi, Dongar Penata, Padanga, and Choshi Mana, Kangajima, one Tanigi, Lonju, with Kangadi. Montiel Yomaros, Monju, Chongmasi, any be that Chabi on the phone, any Kangate Devadi, not to show yours.
The third drawback of attachment is not being content despite the fact that one has obtained what one sought. So, with a lack of contentment and satisfaction, we experience problems. We can probably say that a problem is not that we don't have enjoyments or resources. It's not that we are bereft of resources. We have them, and yet as our mind is unhappy because of dissatisfaction. And this is another fault of attachment. So the last two lines in verse 6 say, even if I see them, there will be no satisfaction, whereby as before, I'll be tormented by craving. There would be difficulties, there would be unhappiness because of attachment. It says in the commentary, even if one sees the desired object, one is not satisfied due to craving. Due to craving, one will be as miserable as before when one did not see the desired object, which means that if you don't have what you desire, you experience problems. But even if you get what you desire, even if you have it, problems still persist because of dissatisfaction. All of these are the problems of dissatisfaction. So long as we are controlled by that sense of attachment for that long, our mind will still be unhappy.
The Sheba, did some masse, don't some masse, he touch 10 to David, Tavio Combo Tavalia, and a Kecheba, Kechebanis.
And then the next point in the outline says that not only gives it suffering, but it also acts as an obstacle for liberation. It acts to hinder liberation in verse number 7.
Yeah. Simjian number Chachini, Kanji, the Tachi Chayu, and the Simjian and the Kazashivanaji, and Kanji Chinani will be, and Dayanaya, and Sam Chaviwan Sombayano, and Yan Tabi, Yandan Kuni Jews Langi, and he of the same drinking, Chapi same drinking. And young tabi nilu tonya and dividends they drew on to be koa medon kavaya and Geshe same young lagaya drop the korevi nilu the druyag and bezin kan chedea mado teach and dunga bin johnny in bata and the ye sozolaya kanaching yobaki and tomatoni and the just you there. That this is Juna, Taman Yangia, and Tonya Jimado, Yang Donya Jimado, Yoma said. You will send in Jibaji, Taman Yang Donyus.
So verse 7 says, through being attached to sentient beings, I will be completely obscured from the perfect reality. Because of attachment, because of clinging to sentient beings, my mind will be completely obscured with respect to what is correct, perfect reality or correct reality. And because of that, I will not be able to see the nature of samsara, which is like a burning pit. Not only I will not be able to develop the determination to leave the burning pit of samsara, I will actively seek to stay in samsara, in the burning pit of samsara. And this is another fault of attachment. It will only bring sorrow in samsara. It will prevent me from seeking the state of liberation.
The deep Geshe Yatamaro, the Chasam Singidi, and it's Tala Homi, and it touches him out of it. Jan Tambi, moving it to the yak. So mean catch on doing the same loss. The Dimchik sends the only, and it tiny that to be will never say it. And moving it to do, Tonya, do we over the still should at us. Jigi, you did but the and assembly and Hatrabino, and Chapa Doya Tolia, some of the stand two sellers.
When you have attachment, you're abiding in a certain extreme view. And if you do abide in an extreme, you do not abide in the middle, and thereby your mind is hindered from seeing reality. You're obstructed from staying in the middle. This is clear. It's clear that it happens when your mind is controlled by attachment. Whereas if you see reality as it is, you'll be able to overcome attachment.
There is and Chapigi, that's Ranshoki, and Kyan Toyaki, Drup, Dawagi, and Shenshoki, Yonden Toya, Druchini, and Chabani, Nazupi, Truya, you can't do the Chabani Chibas, and so much there to me. And she so soon with now Madoina, and it's Jean Pasha Madi, and it's Karichigi of Enya, and talk with language Karichigi, so someone Jilchi, and it came to Jilia, Tani, Betty, and it Kaduin of the Nabanagan so there. So the child does not chat down to the civil shoes.
Attachment obscures you from seeing the faults in another person. And with anger, you're your mind is obscured with respect to the positive qualities of that person. That's what happens with anger and attachment. The mind becomes obscured with respect to positive or negative qualities. And then when we see the way that it affects working in communities or society and so forth, we can see that when, for example, we dislike someone in our community, it doesn't matter what the person does. Even if they do something that is positive, with the mind of the dislike that person, the mind is hindered or obscured with respect to the positive things that we do. And if you do something negative, which is just a slight negative thing, our mind makes a big deal out of it. It paints it as something that is completely negative. We can see the working of anger and attachment in our mind and how it affects our relationship with others in our communities.
그래서 내가 저도 그 아주 갑자기야 갑자기나 주의냐는 지나야 아니 자방 느끼는 거야 아니 직접 그 산답시느냐 자방 느끼는 거야 다들 느끼는 저번 든지를 내가 지금 아니 양이 주지 자방 느끼는 거야 왜 계신 거였어 그게 dim해봐이나 아니 직 소소 마음으로 인생 강 작당 총을 들었어야 내가 차 통통에 지금 영어로 이 메디 견지 통인 거리 이 견서 지체니 아니 지지지에 견견 전대대로나 아니 소배 내가 시도를 넣었어 소배에 준비된 내가 시도를 넣었어 디 패키지 뭐 있었어
So if we do not see the faults of anger and attachment, we'll still be damaged by anger and attachment. So we need to see the faults, we need to recognize the faults of anger and attachment, and particularly in our community here, we definitely need to recognize the faults of anger and attachment. We need to be able to recognize how anger and attachment bring about faults in our mind and how they create problems in our community. How, because of anger and attachment, we do not see reality clearly. And then when we do not see reality clearly, when our mind is affected by anger and attachment, we become critical of others. So then when we look at the way that we often become critical of other people in our community and how much problems and difficulties it is creating between us, you can see that as an evidence, you can use it as an evidence for the faults of anger and attachment. And so long as you don't see the faults of anger and attachment for that long, those situations will continue.
그래서 간지 랑기 차방 그거 있는 두어요. 그치만 그쇼마 밀에 게임이 그 산지면나 심진이 저기를 때 게임이 요마로 이내 게임 비찬 통이야. 내 비찬 통이지. 무수이는야 견다 연대 니가 뭐든지 연대 차명이지. 매직 싸우는 요마로. 그 매직 상발라 아니 연대 차니 매들이야. 넥스주 땡아치 내비찬 아니 견비찬이 견조고주네 견조바이나 아니 미파쇼미 셈라이냐 아니 그 타니스마노가 비리야 서로 네트워크 용투그로 서로 디마지와지 견견견 지지 수수 나오면 되바이나 아니 속하나야 판도면 차기도 서로.
So we need to suppress anger and attachment in our mind stream. And of course, those who are not Buddhas still have negative faults. Only Buddha is free from all faults. So we and other people around us still have faults. So when you see faults in others, you should deliberately also make sure that your mind recognizes good qualities in that person. Not only when you see fault in the other person, you need to make your mind also see the good qualities. It's also good to express them, to verbalize the good qualities of others, because it does have an effect. Being able to verbalize it also has an effect over our mind. Whereas if you tend to not only observe the good qualities of others, but also if you become critical of them, in that you do not allow your mind to remain impartial, but you do give way to anger and attachment and so forth, then you start criticizing others, you will inevitably dwell on their negative qualities, which will become magnified in your mind, and you will not be able to recognize the good qualities. So particularly for us, it's important not only that we recognize how our mind is affected by anger, attachment, and so forth, but that we also make sure that even if we see faults in others, that we still make our mind also recognize the good qualities of others. We should express or verbalize the good qualities of others rather than remaining critical of others.
아니 나나 조금 나 가오면서 균진 대단히 아니 배는 내가 제나 강고치야 그래서 나나 조면서 지 균진 자원인 잘 말았어 갑자기나 나나 만들어야지 균진은 조금 말았어 그래서 나 소소 몸비 조인데 나는 줘야지 오늘 자네 한테 대발잖아 나만도 보시면서 나나 만들어 균진 한다 차이가 말았어 진짜 비기게 딱 간지 안 단지쇼 개지 꽤 조고요나 아니 비 레트 세당이야 아니 꽤 조고요나 딜이야 아니 람데 체트야 소소라야 디여바나 꽤 존나 디고레스 꽤 디게 펜토레스 아니 람데 체 제메 로버체 제메 꽤 짱짱 저대바나 디 느그르마도 소발을 느그르마도 써니 핑마르스 디 산지 때마다 핑무더스라.
And if we dislike a certain person and we become critical of them or what they do, we often say that I don't like it. I oppose that person because I don't like it, or I don't like them. So the sense of dislike, something that you find that you do not find appealing or pleasing, is your main reason for criticizing that person. I don't want them to do it because I dislike what they do. So we need to keep in mind that our a sense of dislike is affected by ignorance, by confusion. And so long as the mind is controlled by confusion, by ignorance, for that long, our way to assess reality would be not perfect. And disliking something is affected by our inability to see reality clearly. So this is not the right way of doing that. So of course, in certain situations, you might think that another person's way of doing things is not the right one. So rather than just becoming critical of that and just saying, I don't like it, and stopping here, find ways that you can find ways or methods that can be improved. So if you think that I don't like this situation, I don't like what the person is doing, rather than just sitting on the fence and continue to criticize that person, you can think that I don't like what they're doing. I don't think that that's the right way. I think that this is the right way of doing it. Other than that, if you just if you constantly dwell on what you dislike and bicker, and that you continue to just become critical without also becoming helpful or constructive in your criticism, a situation would just go from bad to worse. So will be always problems and difficulties rather than being able to work our way through the difficulties that we experience. Carrie, did you have a question?
It relates to the situation. And I'll sort of criticize somebody's behavior because I haven't liked it, which especially is not to it. Because that's just made the situation worse. So to try and turn it around, I was apologize. Offended that person, but also should I just sort of try and see qualities by saying that out loud to them, or just do it? Try to do it. It's very interesting. people noticing too and going, you should do something now.
All right, so
My questioning
Yeah.
was, do I tell them they're good qualities? Like that I really like how you are. They try to do that.
all right, so I'll try to repeat the gist of your question. So you said that you recently had a situation in your at your workplace where you've criticized someone for something that they did and it didn't end up well. So in hindsight, you were wondering if that was the right way of going about it and criticizing that person. Then the question is, if you do criticize that person and you said that other people around you, you had a bit of peer pressure for people telling you what you should have done and what should have said and so forth. So if we when we criticize others, like for example, someone in a place of work, and then we think that as a Dharma practitioner, I should also turn my mind to look at positive qualities of that person. Should I express it directly to that person? Should I also tell them that what you're doing is good, or this thing is good, or the other thing is good, or should we keep it just as a mental state in which we recognize they also have good qualities, but still not necessarily express it to others? I think that this is more or less what you were asking, right? 또 그런 넘긴 룸좀 림보드는 시기로 그런 레가지스들이 미치라 기운된 인사. 근데 내서도 야고 좀 마선스. 아니 도로시나 그런 지역에 가르쳤으나 다들 남배 주 냠는 지체와 있나. 아니 연ten 양다고 그러봤어. 아니 연ten 타와 있나 야 미디라 카투카투 균 준이야 콘솔 연ten 콘솔라 된데 야고레스 연ten 된데 야고레스 근데 카투카투 된데 라고 그러베스 야메나 쳔바참 삼로 담바참 되네 되게레스
좀 해야되겠어.
No.
좀 삼야지.
No.
디 가르치는 거스라고 연된 삼 표시명이 연된 삼비 로지가 봐요. 디를 빠비 텔이야지. 베나 다운슈 총거지. 마가슈 총거지. 용거자스라. 아니 간지 참된 거 잡아서 그렇지. 연된 따위로디 아니 참된 거 잡아서나 용드라지. 그래서 딜리트 오지레스라.
The main thing is just internally in your mind to recognize the good qualities rather than the main thing is having to express that. The main thing is at least in your mind to recognize that they have good qualities, because if you do recognize that they have good qualities, then the sense of care and affection and harmony in your mind will grow towards that person. And if you have a greater sense of care for that person in your heart, that will also translate into your relationship with that person. It would be more harmonious, a better type of relationship. So the focus is actually on the recognition of the positive qualities that occurs in your mind.
예, 난 진짜 대나 심전노나 차고체나야. 심전노나 차고체나 양다니나 군지 부터티 된다니까 무슨 좋아요. 케치지. 상지 용어보 세베 코알 교리. 샘장 지고체도 타와도 이거. 유도와다. 타만을 이거트. 냥이 비동안들어.
We read through verse number 7. Let's look at the commentary through this verse. It says, for those reasons, if one is attached to sentient beings, one will be completely obscured with regards to the perfect meaning itself, and thus it will obstruct the dark perception of ultimate truth. In addition, by craving contaminated phenomena, the mind of disenchantment with cyclic existence will be destroyed, and one will not attain liberation, as one will finally be separated from everything that is pleasant. One will be overwhelmed by misery.
어디래서 내가 봐 그다야 자기 게임지 차고라서 나봐 단조 추수 아니 추수만 간지 아니 이 단조 유덴티 아니 초라 단지 아니 그 이벤트로디 아니 샤기 상을 찍샤그레스.
And the last fault that is pointed out in this section, the last fault of attachment, it causes one to waste the leisures and endowments. So with attachment, your body with freedoms and richnesses is being wasted away.
데레다 테라스 한번 마시기 되면 나올 듯.
By only thinking of them, this life will pass without any meaning.
근데 디지털지 차원 텔라 인 셈바바시 로 아니 율 텔라 차율 텔라야지 셈바바시 아니 단주 추수수 들었어야지 근데 차비기 차율 텔라야 오늘 장이기 비리 아니 차베타도 나신 이동원 지어봐이나 지기도 왔어 뒷자원이니까 이거 말았어 로 난준 대연의 차원 이게 영이지기 율제야 샤투기요 말이 아니 이때 메시지 율제야 차원이 아니 디 비토니 타마딜이야 아니 경우라야 이 맞지 디차고서 됐어.
So the section says that with attachment, you waste your freedoms and richnesses. So we do become attached to different objects. And if the objects of our attachment had existed in the way that our attachment system, you could say that that would be a permissible thing to have attachment. But the things that we are attached to do not exist in the way that attachment system. They're not reliable. There's nothing that we can actually rely upon, whereas attachment system is things that we can rely upon. So you might seek those objects of attachment, but at the end, you still encounter faults and problems.
Basic shabaina sra, basic shabaina. Penanganzo tabigi and chaksagi, then the tunju ridozi. Kasi tunju ridozi, shoot gawir, Chidan tunjule, Changon said, when they send it to me, chew nimbo. That's Sinjan Changon said, in and dig choling jing, and that Changon did, and Shaba Chagas. That we shoot Shaba Sambala, shoes we, which is dependent on root Suzalea, root and kiddo soil, the shogi, the Gonda party, and kidding young, and shogi kidding young, which is the one day kidding young, which is the and kidding young to draw the kid same day only, and kidding number you cut them by the pinyam polea, and some would say the chegos. The chitty and so we lay number G Namju Chuyag to the Choladros, to do it and develop this in the Namju and choose to the Tanshavana. So we then delay laying number G Namju 20 Nivaju. The Chuyagi, Coco the short of us, but the leaders said Temen Dandros, the leaders song of us.
So in thinking of examples, how because of attachment, we waste our freedoms and richnesses, we can think of certain things that we do in our life, like, for example, keeping pets or animals and so forth. Of course, caring for animals and pets is not a negative thing. It is a positive thing. We do want to develop a sense of care for every living being. And yet, sometimes when we think of how we treat pets that we have, so we have a sense of care to them, but it is often mixed up with attachment. It is not that, no, a sense of care is not cultivated with a mind that is impartial. It's actually very much affected by attachment. So we might keep a pet, like for example, a dog. And when we keep a dog as a pet, we need to take care of the dog. So we might take it out for a walk in the morning and also the evening, and we play around with a dog, with a pet, and we also try to behave in a way that makes them happy, right? So we look at the physical behavior, the expressions, and so forth, and we have a playful exchange with them in order to make sure that they're happy. Then in looking at how much time we spend in doing that and how we could have used that time to develop a mind that better distinguishes, better discerns between what is good, what is bad, what is correct, what is incorrect. We often actually waste a lot of time in doing that, whereas we could have used the time better in our Dhamma practice. So we can think of examples like that in relation to what Shantideva is saying here. With a sense of attachment, we do allow our freedoms and richnesses to be wasted away. The commentary says, by thinking exclusively about the objects of desire, this life will pass meaninglessly, and the power of the freedoms and endowments will be exhausted.
간지 남의 상기를 취를 제도 아니 유속 농주의 제가 늘 당시 간지 타마 아니 랑기 속에는 잘거 중립이니까 아니 용무자만 중 아니 진짜 아니 도서기 같이 취기견 속도하세요 제가 먼저 아니 고아체나 비비 아니 취에 먼저 뭐 맞지마 그런 수 여동기 and children too much chagores. These children to be chawati then, and Momba, and Kiwan Kyojun, and Dendro Kiasadi, the Tobamevadoj. In an Anzugi, and that did Kiwan Kyojun, and she's sending them in Jaya, and she's sending the didn't to me, and huge Jewish Mangaros.
They concentrate. So we will leave this session here for now, but before that, let's dedicate the virtue that all of us have accumulated together, particularly as we said in this particular date, March 10th. So often we think of the mental attitude that we develop in a Dhamma practice, even willing to give up our own body and life for the sake of the Buddha Dhamma. Hundreds of thousands of people that have perished in Tibet died with a similar attitude of willing even to give up their own life, give up the body and life for the sake of the Dhamma. So in concluding this session, we can dedicate that all the merit and the virtue that we have accumulated before, may that result in optimal conditions, conducive conditions for the people that have perished throughout that time. May they find a succession of rebirths, of happy rebirths, good states of rebirth, and once again, be able to meet with the Buddha Dhamma so that they will continue to develop the mind all the way to liberation and enlightenment. With that, let's do some dedication prayers. Nyododa lama sangye trugime towa chikyama lupa de salago pacho. Rinpoche ma ke panan ke gyurchi ke panyam pa me pa gone gondu pe vasho kowe shinkande pendande wa malu juwen chenre siwan te singya tsoi shape si te padu tengyu chi Chana temo tensing yatsola. So what dev so chendu. Chansi jango yawe. Tenzi jong pepe. Chosun Kowele Muntu Pada Sodu Kondu Shate.
So we also have the prayer for remembering the kindness of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who is also
Dila Sovalim Pacheki, Zeve Garim Pacheki, Piggy Namash.
Yes.
the object of
Transmigratory beings in all our lifetimes is the embodiment of the rituals still embassy. The Guru, the wish granting jewel, Zonos, the Dalai, the Master, Parmasambhava, the Dharma King, Tsultrim Gampo, Chintan Desin, the Abbot, Shantalikshita, and the numberless holy beings who preserve and spread Buddha Dharma today, and the Tibetan people who practice and serve Buddhism faithfully for 1,000 years, as well as those who, along with many others, died sacrificing their lives for Tibetans as honest. All their positive wishes be fulfilled. Due to the harness, the son of Tibetan Buddhism has no. I have received the perfect human body and never need to lead a meaningful life. A refuge and savior, the Supreme One, is known as the Dalai Lama, and the Tibetan people have been so long time to. Remembering this, we make the following dedicating prayer. May His Holiness the Dalai Lama, may the snow land of Tibet achieve pure freedom and develop the Buddha Dharma even more. And may all mother transmigrated beings achieve enlightenment quickly.
Tomorrow we have for the religious responsibility. There will be some questions in the cabinet, and then we would like to join through the kind of tour about the environment of SBI and teaching about
after it's at lunchtime.
at lunch.
Does that mean we'll have to discuss about having
What's the brain of something to do with the walk